I see a lot of people jumping in, so I think we're safe to get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Eugenia. I'm with OCIC, with the team here. And before we get going, we want to honor and acknowledge that OCIC operates on Indigenous lands. Like myself, the OCIC team is joining virtually from Takaronto, the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I'd like to invite you to reflect on your connection to the land first. So think about the beautiful gifts from Earth that you're able to enjoy. For myself, I'm lucky to live near a body of water, near the lake, and the beautiful sounds of the water. Perhaps you live nearby a forest, or perhaps you can see the trees changing color near your window. It's a beautiful time in the year. Maybe you grew vegetables in your garden near your place this year, or in your own backyard. Think about that for a second. Think about the images that come to mind, and also the feeling that has for you. As an immigrant and a guest on this land myself, I acknowledge and are eternally grateful for the ancestral, current, and future caretakers of this land, without which I couldn't be here. Indigenous people across Turtle Island and around the world have and continue to demand climate justice, sovereignty, and the right to live. As a guest in this territory, I ask, how can I educate myself and stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples when called upon? How can I, as a youth, engage in reconciliation, decolonizing, and unlearning, starting inwards with myself? How can I ask the hard questions in my organization, in my family, and make space for Black, Indigenous, and people of color to lead? We hope that our work honors the spirit of the dish with one spoon, and that beyond these 2 days in which we're going to be together online, we amplify the teachings that remind us to share together and to center the well-being of Mother Earth, the water, and all of our relations. To get us kicked off, Kim, over to you.
Thanks, Eugenia. That was very moving. Thank you all for joining, or for rejoining if you've come just out of our AGM this morning. So this is the first of 3 dialogue sessions that we're offering as a part of the symposium, entitled Ways Forward in Community Engagement, Ethics, Metrics, and Transformative Change. During this unprecedented time of challenge and change, we recognize and value the time that you're giving to us to come together, to learn and to unlearn. This is a phrase that I'm hearing a lot these days, and it is deeply true that we need to think and learn about what we know as individuals and collectively, what our experiences have been, what our insights are, what research shows us, who defines that research, what are our practices towards ethical community engagement and systemic, sectoral, and organizational change. So this afternoon and tomorrow, we have the opportunity to hear from and be in conversation with 14 contributors that have been invited specifically to bring their perspectives and experiences towards these 3 themes. And the themes relate to COVID-19 pandemic and our collective movement towards a just recovery, systemic and organizational change in international cooperation and efforts towards universal sustainable development, and our own considerations for ethical, community, and public engagement, increased accessibility, inclusion, and impact. I'm really very pleased to introduce our special guest to kick us off, Marianick Tremblay. Marianick Tremblay joined Global Affairs Canada in 1995, and in her diplomatic career, she has had diverse experiences in human rights, environmental law, small arms, and foreign relations with the Americas. She served in Canadian embassies in Mexico, Morocco, and Chile, and as Ambassador of Canada in El Salvador and Ecuador. Since 2018, she has been the Director General of the Engaging Canadians Bureau at the Partnerships for Development Innovation branch at Global Affairs Canada. And I will say that I've had the very personal pleasure of working closely with Marianick on our joint Civil Society Global Affairs Canada Partnership Policy Advisory Committee. And we do have the chance to meet regularly as a part of the Intercouncil Network and our focused discussions on the role of civil society and government relations. So we do have very brief time for opening remarks, but we will invite questions and comments in the chat, including in English and in French. And we will just be able to take a few likely, but we will gather up what you're commenting and sharing and share that back to Global Affairs and keep it in our ongoing conversations. So we will be wrapping up this session at 11:55 or so, just to manage our expectations here, to honor the next panel that's coming. So on that note, Director General Tremblay, thank you for joining us, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Kim. Just a few words in French to start with. Merci à tout le monde. Je suis heureuse d'être là. Je veux juste m'assurer que tout le monde sache que si vous avez des questions à poser en français, ça va me faire plaisir d'y répondre, mais que l'ensemble de l'événement, pour des raisons pratiques, se fera plus en anglais. So just offering the opportunity for people who wish to ask questions in French to do so. If not, I will do my remarks in English, but again, reminding everyone that both languages are welcome today. So thank you again, Kim. I must say, it's always a pleasure when I get this kind of invitation. It's kind of bringing sun in my daily routine, which is made of other types of meetings, not as exciting as this one. So this is a gift for me. I usually always say yes to Kim anyways, because you usually, I mean, you always have great events. I was remembering the last time actually I was in Toronto, Kim, was in February for the International Development Week, where we shared together a very busy schedule. We had the Deputy Minister with us for a flagship event. We went to City Hall together for another event. And we also shared a cake at your headquarters, having a chat in a panel in the evening. So Kim always knows how to keep me busy, and I'm always willing to do so. All this to say that the relationship that we have with the councils, the Ontario one, but we have 8 provincial and regional councils, that relationship is very, very important to us. We are proud to be supporting you and your events. The outreach that you have within the communities, the way you engage Canadian, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, is instrumental. If we want to continue to work as Canadians together across Canada, it's not me sitting here in Ottawa in my little room in my house. It's all of you. It's all the councils across Canada. It's everybody who wants to be involved that actually can change things, and it really, really matters to us. So we're very proud to be supporting the council in its events. Let me start with saying a few words about my mandate. I get this very nice title, DG for Engaging Canadians, but what does it really, really mean? So I do actually different things. The first one, obviously, we support the councils through the Inspiring Action for Global Citizenship program, and this is a very important part of my team work. But we also engage Canadians differently through, for example, 2 internship programs. You may have heard of the Young Professional Internship Program, and there's also the the Youth Aboriginal Program. And obviously there's the volunteer program, which has been known across Canada for the past 30 to 40 years. So this is also part of my portfolio. I am also responsible, Kim referred to that, for the policy for civil society partnership. So this is a policy that was consulted with civil society, was developed together a couple of years ago, and we are currently working on implementing the policy. It has objectives where both the civil society and the department are working together to implement this. So this is also important. Another thing that is of interest to you is the call for proposal secretariat is under me as well. So this is the place where we offer funding and we launch those calls for proposals so that all the organizations can actually apply and get a chance at funding within Department of Foreign Affairs. So it's under me as well. Now, since the pandemic started, I was also given another mandate, which is to liaise with civil society regarding the progression and the impact of the pandemic on the organizations. So these have been very difficult times for everybody, both at the personal level, family level, professional level, but for the organizations, it's also been very, very challenging. I mentioned the internship program and the volunteer program, but as you may realize, nobody was able to fly out of Canada in the past 6 months to actually go and implement their program. So you can see how difficult it could be for those organizations to try to survive and maybe change, adapt their programming in order to be able to start again or continue to support from a distance the local partners on the ground. So we have created a dialogue group which allows us to discuss with 5 different networks representing all the organizations across Canada, so that we are able to follow the impact of the pandemic and also work through a solution group. We're working towards solutions. Some of them are temporary because we do hope that COVID won't last forever. So we see this as a period that we have to go through and find temporary measures to support the organizations, so that after that we can go through a transition period, and then there will be the after COVID. I don't like to say it's a return to normal. I think that normal will be different. It will be a new normal. So we are working very, very closely, my team and I, with the sector in general to try to support the organizations as we go through this. So I think it all showcases how resilient people are, not just the organizations, but as individuals. When we continue to discuss and when we interact, when we continue to look forward, being able again to go back into the action, people are very, very resilient. So I admire that very much. So some would say that I'm a bit busy, but the minister has been busy too. You may have heard that she had town halls with, open to the sector. We had town halls that had 700 participants speaking to the minister. That was really amazing, and she appreciated that very much so. After that, we organized for the minister roundtables on thematics with different actors from across Canada, from civil society. So all this to say that it is very important for us to maintain that relationship, the dialogue open, and the exchange of ideas between the different organizations, the councils in the regions, in the provinces, and us. As I said, sitting in Ottawa doesn't allow me to know what it looks like on the ground. So all those interactions are most welcome. And speaking of busy, I was looking at your agenda. I think that the last 2 days will be very busy for you as well. But I was really interested when I looked at your panels, and I must say I commend the choices that you have made. And I wanted to acknowledge that panels that will focus on Black, Indigenous, persons of colors, their lives matters. We are concerned as well in Ottawa, and we support all those efforts and events that allow that there is a dialogue around this. I also wanted to refer very briefly to the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse in international assistance. Unfortunately, you've seen that there's been a report coming out last week of referring to the Ebola crisis 2 years ago, where we see, unfortunately, again, that some international workers would have abused women during that crisis. We are in another crisis. We are in the COVID right now. We have beneficiaries, people that count on us to support them and not abuse them. So we are very concerned about that, and we are supporting the international efforts to continue to prevent this. You may know or may not know, but we are financing a hub that is located in Ottawa within the Canadian Corporation, the former CCIC, but it's available to all the organizations, and that hub is meant to provide tools and support and capacity building within the organizations to help the organizations train the people that go out there and also take the appropriate measures that we continue to prevent exploitation and abuse to go on. So I wanted to mention that because it's never going to be okay. We always will have to make efforts. Unfortunately, we learn about the abuse years after. There are various reasons for that, but the more we talk about it, the better and the easier it will be for victims and survivors to actually speak up. So just wanted to say that's very important to us. I'm going to talk briefly about two things today. First one being public engagement. And this is something the council does very well. And if we looked at how we approach public engagement, engaging, speaking to the Canadians, it has changed a lot since the 60s when CIDA first started doing that. It was mostly communication at the beginning, you know, sharing messages. You've seen documentaries, World Visions, helping the children abroad and all of this. And we're really in a different world now. I mean, social media, it's evolving every single day. You know, we get used to Twitter and the kids are already on something else. So we need to be able to be better at reaching out the Canadians and reach them where they are. And again, that's one thing that the councils are helping us, because you are in the regions and we are not. But together we need to work together. And so what we're doing right now is that we're defining a new approach. We're trying to provide tools that will be available to all the people that want to. It doesn't have to be an organization that is a partner of Foreign Affairs. It should be available in a few months. And we're talking about some sort of a toolkit where people can actually learn more and have tips about how to best engage. We'll work with the communication section of the department to make sure that we have images and logos and thematics available to people so that we will make it easier, because obviously some of the big organizations have director of communication, but this is a very small percentage, and everybody is able to do something about that. And actually, I would think that the smaller organizations are probably closer to the communities and you know, the people. So it would be great for those people as well to be able to join us when we're trying to tell the stories of Canadians, why it matters that we should be helping, you know, vulnerable populations abroad. So we're talking about making the link to the local to the global. What we do abroad actually improves the lives of Canadians, and what we do matters, and there is an impact. So we'll continue to work together on this and invite you to participate when we have further activities or events. We're talking about more educating people towards global citizenship. It's not just informing them, you know, as Canadians, but they are part of this world, and we want Canadian to be a big part of that, you know, citizenship that runs across the world. So that will be happening, and it will support the smaller organizations. The second thing I wanted to say was actually, again, about the smaller organizations, which we call with the SMOs. It's an abbreviation, small medium organizations. So, you know, I know that often it looks like all the big organizations get the funding from the department, the big, you know, the governments and all of this. Some may say, well, they have more staff to prepare the proposals, or they have more experience. They've been doing this for years and years and years. So we really wanted a couple of years ago to create an initiative that will allow smaller organizations to develop their own capacity and get access to funding. So we created that, the SMO initiatives. And so far we've had 2 calls for proposals. And we made those calls only available to the small organizations, so they would not be in competition with the big ones. It's really a call that is only open to what we consider the small and medium organizations. So there have been 2 calls of this so far. We're still processing the second call. And if all continues to go well, we hope to be able to continue in the future. So that will give those smaller organizations the possibility to receive funding and also gain experience so that they can apply in other calls later and continue to get funding. But only this would not be enough. So we also created 2 other initiatives that are aiming at supporting, again, the smaller organization in developing their capacity. One is called the Capacity Building and Knowledge Sharing Window. It's actually to help the organization develop their capacity in writing proposals, creating a project, you know, all those elements that would be needed to develop their capacity. And I'm sure that Kim later can put either on the chat or send to you. We have all the links, right, of those resources where you could actually access and see. And the training is available for all the organizations across Canada. It's managed by the Alberta Council, this one, but again, it's managed by them on behalf of all the other councils and available to all the organization. The other one is an innovation window. And that's an interesting one because it's, it allows the organization to gain a small amount of funding to actually test and use innovation in their programming to find solution for the SDG. So again, it's meant to be available only to the small organizations. So we're proud of this. We continue to receive feedback and we have adjusted, for example, the calls. We have adjusted the way that we process this to make sure that it's not too time consuming for the organizations. We are providing webinars, we answer questions and answers on all of this. And I just would like to make sure after that we are able to send to you the links so that we continue to spread the word and make sure that the smaller organizations know that we wish to diversify our partnerships and give the chance to everyone to be a part of this. So I think I'm gonna stop here so that we have time maybe for a few questions. I'm sorry if I took too much time. I'm always happy to speak to you, and it's, here you go.
Thank you, Marianick. That was, you deserve an award. That was a very rapid update on many of the things that are relevant to this section. And also the efforts of Global Affairs to support a whole of society approach and to support public engagement. And this is something we call for. So we do have a question in the chat that was asking about the timeline for awarding the SMO proposals. And I'm assuming, Jackie, you might mean the fund that is run by Global Affairs, not the FIT fund. Yeah. So Marianick, do you have a timeline for the SMO?
So that we had a first call 2 years ago, a second one who is completing right now. I mean, the date is, you know, the call is closed and we are assessing, we are in the last phase of assessing the proposals. So we actually we had an initial envelope of 100 million. We thought we could spread it through 3 to 4 calls, but the demand was so high. Just for the first call, we received 196 proposals. And the second call was 178, I think. And with the amount of money that we have, it means probably 20 proposals that we can accept per call. So what we're doing right now is gathering all the feedback and the lessons learned and to consider when we would be able to launch a third call. So I don't have a date for now, but as always, we also have a website where people can actually go and see all the calls, including the SMOs, but all the calls that are open. And I can send a link to that to Kim as well. She can share with you. And we always encourage people to monitor that page. You get a lot of information available for the partners and the people, the organizations that wish to become partners, and all the calls would always be listed with the dates and all of it. And there's always like a heads up when a call is coming. So you would see the information about the past calls, not the next one, but it's to be monitored.
Thanks, Marianick. And just to reiterate, in the AGM earlier, I did very rapid update on the FIT program as well, and that about $4 million has been approved for 2 different calls that came out, and the third call is open right now for the FIT fund. So these you have links already, we'll send them out again. Is there any last question for Marianick? We do need to wrap up this session in order to keep on track for the panel. And I see, looking at faces, if you'd like to come off mute and ask a question, or if you would like to type a question in. Oh, yeah, here we go. So So Bella Lam is asking, there recently were consultations with CSOs on Canada's climate change funding commitment. What is the partnership branch's role in these discussions at Global Affairs Canada? Thanks for the question, Bella.
None. Like, I know it's happening, but it really goes with the climate change DG who's responsible for that. This is quite a thing. There were, just to let you know, 13, I don't know how many, 3 different roundtables on climate change with the minister and organizations, and 13 different interactions, I think. So it's pretty much up there on the priority list. But unfortunately, I'm unable to give you all the details because it's really another section who deals with this. But as I said, it's pretty high on the priority list.
Thanks, Marianick. And this will be the last question we'll take from Shauna Novak. Has GAC considered designating a person within partnerships to support ongoing communication for SMOs that are not currently in receipt of a GAC grant, but are actively engaged in international programming?
Good point. I'll take note of that. Just to let you know what we did up to COVID stopped us, but I sent my team around. We did webinars in 13 different cities, supported by the different councils, to offer some sessions, information sessions, and some capacity building. And it was open to non-members and also participants from organizations that do not have an agreement currently with GAC. So we are interested in having this outreach and this communication. I'll say it's a good idea to have someone who could, I guess the purpose is to have questions or further information. So I'll look into this. I thank you for that.
Thanks, Marianick. And I'll just answer as well that I think in some respects, this is part of the role of the councils, that we do represent the collective. So we're there at the table to kind of work in between Global Affairs Canada and our membership. You can always do it on your own, but it's also helpful that we always hear in from you. So when you're experiencing something, probably others are too. And we try to work together to bring those issues to the table in the various platforms. Marianick did speak about the COVID dialogue group, the solutions group. In the past, there's been the TAFI task force looking at the implementation of the Feminist International Assistance Policy and various groups. And maybe just to say that as councils, this broader network that includes CCIC and all of the provincial and regional councils, we do collaborate very closely, almost daily, at least weekly, behind the scenes to talk about the role of civil society in enabling environment. So never hesitate to send in your questions and comments to us. And then that's also a way to do it anonymously, so that if you don't want to put yourself forward, you can do it that way. And I am going to stop and thank Director General Marianick Tremblay for joining us for this session. It's very fast, we know that, but we're hoping to have more of these conversations, including, as was mentioned by Julian in the gender equality presentation this morning, a dialogue around gender equality in November for the 16 days of action, and that we could bring the global partners together. So thank you so much for coming and joining us. And all of you, again, always keep the questions coming, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much. Merci à tout le monde. Have a great 2 days. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon, Kim.
Okay, thanks. And Ohani, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Marianick. Very nice to hear from you. And on to the next session. So thank you all for joining. Welcome again if you just joined us. We are on to our first panel of our symposium. And since the pandemic started, we have been following and engaging our members to understand the impacts of COVID-19 for the sector, but also around the world. We as a network have a beautiful bird's eye view of what's going on around the world, really through you, through our membership, through the civil society organizations, institutions, and people that are working around the world for sustainable development. So we're very happy to bring you today to kick us off in our symposium, 5 of our members to help share critical issues related to COVID-19, the pandemic, and how it's affected some of our sectoral programs, some of the partnerships, but also to share how we've been resilient. So how have we been able to adapt, pivot where we've been able to, but we also understand that supports are still needed across the board. So hopefully we'll get a very good picture of some of the things that our members are grappling with. And to help us do that, we have 4 panelists: Laura Games from Horizons of Friendship, Juan Jose Arenas Ladino from the YWCA of Colombia, but also connected with the YWCA of Greater Toronto. And with Juan Jose, I hope you're here, but he's joining us from Colombia with sometimes choppy internet, so I will ask for your patience. You know, we might lose him at some point, or maybe he's not able to join yet. We'll enjoy if he's able to, but if not, please bear with us. We also have Shona Novak from CISAPO, and Tina Sweeney from CUSO International. So welcome all. And our fabulous moderator today is Sarah Awat, who is the Advisor for Gender Equality and Women's Economic Empowerment at the Canadian Executive Service Organization. So Sarah, over to you, and thank you panelists for your time and insights today.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. I hope everyone can hear me. Yes, perfect. So I hope everyone's doing well, holding up with everything happening around us in the world. I'm very happy and honored actually to be moderating this session. The issue of COVID-19 and the impact is something that's very important to the current world. We always hear that the current pandemic represents one of the greatest challenges that the world has faced since the Second World War. It seems like in less than a year, the pandemic has profoundly changed daily lives across the world, forcing the majority of people to adopt new ways of life, both physically but also mentally. But more importantly, for this session specifically, the crisis is really expecting to hit developing countries disproportionately in the longer term. So this panel will mainly explore critical areas and issues related to the COVID-19 pandemic, how it has affected sectoral programs, partnerships, how organizations have been able to pivot, adapt, as well as to meet the needs of their partners and the most vulnerable. We also are going to explore areas where support is still needed and what are the implications for building back stronger and this just recovery approach that we want to have. So before we start, let me give you a brief introduction about myself and our panelists today. My name is Sarah Awad, as I was mentioned by Eugenia. I'm the Gender Equality and Women's Economic Empowerment Advisor at CUSO. We're an international development organization currently implementing 2 major projects funded by Global Affairs Canada. We work in 21 countries across the world, so this really gives us a global view of what is happening in different corners of the world. We focus on building the capacity of our local partners through technical assistance, mentorship, as well as training. We rely on sending expert volunteers to the field. However, given the current context and suspension of international travels, this was kind of a bit of a challenge, so we had to adapt to that. And so in order to really identify and analyze the impacts of COVID-19, CUSO conducted an in-depth research about the social and economic impacts of COVID in all countries where CUSO currently operates. This has been a really important step for us in helping us shape and adapt our programs and responding to the realities on the ground and what is happening in the field. So I'm very excited to share some of the findings of this research with you during this panel, but also to listen to other perspectives from our panelists who come from very different backgrounds. I will share the link of the reports in the Zoom chat right now. And so without any further ado, I guess I'd like to welcome our panelists, each of whom again have very different background and very interesting experiences so that we have different perspectives to the same issue. So Tina Sweeney, our Outreach and Partnership Officer at CUSO. We also have Juan Jose from the International Youth Champion, UMCA, at the GTA. Shona Novak, Executive Director, Canadian International Scientific Exchange Program. And finally, Laura Games, the Program Manager for Horizons of Friendships, Maternal, Newborn, and Child Health Project in Guatemala. So I guess we can start with the discussion. because I know that if we keep on discussing this topic, we can take the whole day, even the whole week, just discussing the impacts and everything related to that. So maybe I would remind the panelists that we only have 5 minutes each to respond to the discussion. So maybe to start off, I could ask Tina if you could give us a brief introduction about yourself and what you do. Let us know how the COVID-19 crisis has affected your sectoral programs and partnerships.
So thank you, Sarah, and thank you, OCIC. I think I'm excited to be with all of you in this panel discussion. And I hope what I have to share is valuable. I won't get into my bio. I think you can read that in the package that you were given, but more so why I'm here today and how I would like to highlight 3 areas of a just recovery. So I'll discuss 3 areas of a just recovery around putting people's health and well-being first, strengthening the safety nets and providing relief directly to people, and prioritizing the needs of workers and communities. And so I think it's clear I'm coming from a communications background and team at CUSO International, and I'm currently going to speak through the lens of communication, outreach, and partnerships. But I would also like to provide some details on our Women's Voice and Leadership program and how that has been affected. So, you know I only have 5 minutes, but I'm sure everyone can relate to the roller coaster of emotions and impact of COVID-19. I do hope that everyone is in a good place and is feeling resilient and strong, and that you're really being mindful of your self-care. And without belaboring too much around communications, theories, and strategies, I do want to highlight from my lens the importance of authentic and frequent communications. And that communication is coming from the top down as well as the bottom up. It's an area that I've noticed that really has supported people's well-being within the organization and really has created this kind of social safety net that wasn't there before, to be quite honest. We are really talking to each other and listening to one another in a way that I have noticed different since the pandemic, and it's kind of intentional. We're being purposeful in our connecting. And I noticed that through our leadership and through effective communications, it really is the nucleus for me. I'll speak through my lens, but also I believe through our staff around the world to be able to, through a pandemic and through all these stressors, carry out their work. So I know, I think I have 2 more minutes, just shifting a little bit from a program's perspective and speaking about a just recovery. Our Women's Voice and Leadership in Peru, I know from my colleagues in Peru that there are millions of Peruvians who are living through a tremendous adversity right now, and that the quarantine has been incredibly difficult, particularly for women. Although the Peruvian government is providing a bonus, it's about $300. It helps them during quarantine. It's for the poorest of families and they only get it one time. It's really not enough. It's not enough for the amount of time that quarantine has lasted, and it's not enough for the size of largeness of the families that it's trying to provide for. So CUSO's Women Voice and Leadership project is being implemented in 14 regions in Peru by 4 well-known national women's rights organizations. One is an Indigenous organization, and the project is funded through Global Affairs Canada. The ultimate goal is advancing gender equality in Peru. And since the earliest phase of COVID-19, funds called Fast Response Strategic Funds have assisted our women's organizations through COVID-19 related to emergencies for their communities. And there's a whole list of what these funds have been conduced for, but I'll just get into 2 or 3. So basic survival, for food, for sanitation supplies. The Women's Voice and Leadership program has also been able to communicate, again, tying that back to communications, gender violence and around COVID-19 prevention and messages through radio spots. And finally, the fund has provided psychosocial support for women experience gender-based violence and mental health outbreaks. And this is by providing cell phone credit to a network of sociologists and providing legal support to victims of gender-based violence for women and LGBTQ communities. So again, I can go on, but just wrapping up with my 5 minutes, I think, to summarize, where are we at? We continue to emphasize the key role that communications and outreach has, storytelling towards a just recovery to support a real care culture and a self-care culture. And we continue to adapt our programs and partnerships to address the COVID-19 emergencies with our programs and communities. So back to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to see the link and the concrete examples that you've given us, and how outreach and engagement was one of the major points and one of the major areas where you had to kind of see some changes. And I guess this could link us to Juan Jose, because you're in the field, you are in Colombia, so maybe you could give us some information about what is happening, introduce yourself, of course, and tell us what was the grassroots impact and what happened to organizations around you. What was your experience?
Oh, you're muted.
Juan Jose?
Juan Jose, we can't hear you yet. Can you unmute yourself?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Well,
Thank you.
Nice to meet you today. It's a really nice space, and thank you very much for inviting me here. Well, my name is Juan Jose. I'm 20 years old. I'm a YMCA volunteer since 2016, and well, I'm gonna tell you about what happened when COVID arrives here and and what we do. Well, first, when COVID comes, it was like how our participants and how people that we know, it's not gonna be able to buy food, it's gonna feed. And it was like our main preoccupation about everything. It was like, man, we need to do something for these people, because now we're gonna start a lockdown, and how people is gonna buy food. Well, it was a really a special thing for volunteers here in Risaralda, because, or in Pereira specifically, because all the youth organizations, we were planning how we can take action about it. And first, as I told you, the food was our main preoccupation, and we were talking and we were doing like many things to recover all to pick all the food that we needed, and like to do a out parent some communities, and in that way each of organization were giving their food in order they was like their responsibility we took. I don't know if I was clear. We took a community like our own community, and we were doing all the things we need to provide them food for the first 3 months. It was first in that way. It was our first thing to do, but it took a lot of work, because it's not like everyone has food to to give. So we needed to do many things to call people outside the country, into the country, into different cities. It was like we create like a call center to start this work. So as I studied also as a psychology student, I also know how we can do an interview, how we convince people, how we can use a perfect speech to sensibilize the other one to the things you want to do to convince it. So we were doing like a training process and for the volunteers here, and then we start to doing that. So it was a really beautiful thing, because we could see the solidarity, the humanity, and not for just the volunteers, for the other people outside. So it was really nice to see that, and to see the impact for the people that we were helping. That was the first part. The other part was for the as the COVID-19 as the lockdown. many people needed to be in the houses. So we also saw the female, the violence against women increasing like 3 times more than it was before. So we also, as Inicio Sostenible, we were working and doing some podcasts to start to empower women, empower them to say that, yeah, it's not really, I need to take care of me first, and in order to do that, I need to know where I need to call to receive the appropriate help. So we were doing like a magazine when we were putting information, putting all the places that they needed to call, and in that way we start to doing that. Now we are still worried about the food, but now the process is really different because now we are doing like farm, doing like a farm in a place that we have. So we are Eugenia, how do you say sembrar into English?
Plant, to plant
Yeah,
seeds.
plant, yes, thank you. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, we are doing that. And the main goal is to have in the future like a little plantations into our participants houses. So now we are not just giving food; they are working to have some of them. So now the president it's quite different, but it was a really work to do. And yeah, that's how we are facing here in Risaralda or in Pereira exclusively the things how we face COVID into our president. I think that it was like 5 minutes.
You went a little bit over the 5 minutes, but it's fine. I guess we had a little bit of time from the introduction. And I think that gender-based violence is one of the topics that's very important. It's one of the topics that has been discussed a lot during COVID because, as you mentioned, the impact of staying at home. So maybe I should shift to Laura, and if you could give us a little bit of a background about yourself again, as well as your experience in the field of maternal, newborn, and child health. How is that affected, and has staying at home also impacted health in general, but specifically maternal health?
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to both the four. You both touch points that I'm going to touch on, so I'm going to try and cut down on those points to not be redundant. So before I go into the question, I think it's important to sort of quickly introduce Horizons of Friendship and the lens I'm looking at in discussing COVID-19. So Horizons is a really small organization. We're based out of Cobourg, Ontario, which, if you don't know where that is, that's somewhere between Kingston and Toronto. And for over 40 years, we have worked primarily and only in Central America and Mexico. And we have done this through what we believe is partnership. So what this means for us is partnership where the local partners lead the design and implementation and evaluation of their own projects. And we sort of support this as background, institutional strengthening through financing and building regional links. So when COVID-19 hit, we had some advantages in that we had built sort of a relationship that was founded in trust and communication. And Tina alluded to this. It was very genuine, communication that you needed during this time. We needed to know what was really happening and not have this sort of inflated view of, oh no, everything's okay or everything's going to be rosy. We knew things weren't rosy. But more importantly, I think one of the things that sort of had in our advantage was that our partners were well positioned to sort of map the impact of COVID-19, and collaboratively we found ways to adapt. So when we look at sectors most impacted in Central America and Mexico, the obvious answer is health, and I can go on for hours about maternal, newborn, and child health and the impact of this in COVID-19. But I think when you really look deeper, you see this affected all sectors, from education to livelihoods, to food security and food sovereignty. And we have to also sort of consider that prior to COVID-19, the region was already facing high levels of inequality and poverty. And in some contexts, political instability and violence were fueling displacement. So to add another sort of little dimension, and we saw this during COVID-19, Mexico and Central America countries are vastly exposed to earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, and natural disasters. So we actually had some tornadoes and storms during COVID-19 that made everything a little bit more complicated. And I just want to point this out because when we look at how COVID-19 affected the region, we need to sort of step back and understand that the effect in each context did not happen in a vacuum, that there was other things at play at the same time. I want to shift a little bit the conversation and not focus on sectors, but look at particularly groups that were affected. And in this, I can discuss a little bit more about maternal, newborn, and child health. So historically, the region has marginalized Afro and Indigenous groups for a very long time. You look at these communities across the region and you see there's high levels of poverty, exclusion, and limited access to justice. So when COVID-19 hit, it only exacerbated needs in the community. In some contexts and across the region, we saw challenges in response considering Indigenous expertise and leadership. And to give you an example, in the communities where we work, for instance, on maternal, newborn, child health, all the health messaging was in Spanish, but the community doesn't speak Spanish. So we really needed to shift quickly and say, okay, what is the messaging that we're giving to mothers? How are we supporting children to understand what are the dangers of COVID-19 and dispel myths in their own language, in Maya Quiche language, is particularly in Guatemala where we work. Another group that was severely impacted, and we worked a lot around sexual health and rights, was youth. We saw youth, and many youth are still out of school. Youth are, less able to access before the job market. Most of the youth work in informal and formal sector, and many of them were not considered in the response. It's wonderful to hear youth like Juan Jose who are taking this leadership on. But the reality is that when we were looking at what sectors were affected, youth were rarely involved or really mapped into what was happening in the immediate sort of response. And again, Juan Carlos touched on this, gender-based violence across the region increased during this time. I know it's around the world, but the region had already high levels of femicide prior to this. And we know from historical evidence that gender-based violence increases during times of crisis and natural disasters. So the risk was even worse for women, and in particularly women with a disability or LGBTQI+ women. We saw, for instance, in terms of maternal and newborn child health, women were not able to access contraceptives. I think the United Populations Fund estimated that around 47 million women in the world lost access to contraceptives. Of those 47 million, 18 million were in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean. So we know this will have an effect in not just the sexual health of women in the future, but also in our work to end preventable maternal deaths. And lastly, and not least, I think we have to again consider how this affected women in the region. We have still unpaid care and domestic work is still a job of the women. And so when we looked at response, we had to consider not just, okay, women are at the home taking care of all this, children and responsibilities, but we also had to consider that with our partners. We've invested for a long term in women-led organizations. So we've invested in organizations that are looking for gender parity at all levels, managing all the way down. So when we were communicating with our partners, we had to be mindful, our executive directors, our women managers, that they had added professional and personal responsibility that we needed to be mindful. And again, Tina alluded to this in her, we needed to be mindful of their well-being, because there's no way that we could have a prosperous partnership if they're stressed out of their own things at home. They cannot attend to the community. They cannot be frontliners. So I think when we looked at COVID-19 and the impacts, I think it was important to us to not just consider what sectors, not look at just maternal and newborn and child health sort of in a vacuum, but sort of look at who was being excluded and included in the response, how COVID-19 was affecting them, and then sort of mapping interventions that could build inclusive sort of interventions to help those sort of marginalized populations. So That is all.
Thank you very much. So we've passed a little bit the 5 minutes, but what you were saying was very, very interesting, and it resounds a lot because when we did the research, and the kind of research that CASA has done was we started with secondary resources, so everything online, all the articles, reports, international reports, regional reports, and then we started looking into the field. So we started asking our country representatives and our offices, so what is actually happening? We read on the news that this and this is happening, so what is actually happening on the ground? And this is when the information started getting very interesting because, as you mentioned, women and marginalized groups come at a disadvantage when it comes to crisis, whether climate related or health related, such as the one that we're having right now. And therefore, a focus on women and marginalized communities is going to be very important looking to the future, of course. And I think it also resounds with Global Affairs Canada's FIAP, the Femmes International Assistance Policy, that really wants us to focus on women, that really wants us to engage women, make sure that they're agents of change and not just the gender equality in general, women's economic empowerment in general, is a tool, but also a means to achieve inclusive economic development throughout the world. So I guess now we can turn to Shauna, and if you could give us also a brief overview about yourself and how is your organization affected, what kind of sectoral, or not just sectoral, again, we can shift a little bit the discussion, not just on how sectors were affected, but maybe how you saw communities being affected. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a lot to fit in to 5 minutes.
I know, but we can try to summarize, and then we're gonna, I would like to remind everyone that we're gonna break out into 5 different groups where the audience can ask more questions and we can respond in more details with everyone. The breakouts for the groups in general, it's gonna be done randomly. But again, we're happy to have any questions on the chat that we can respond to at the end of the session.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, and thanks, Ohenia, as well, for organizing this, and Tina and Laura and Juan Jose for your incredible perspectives, and for doing the work that you've been doing over the past 8 months. I'm Shauna Novak, and I work with SICIPO. It's the Canada International Scientific Exchange Program, and I've been doing this for about 20 some odd years, but this past year has presented something different from anything I've ever experienced in my entire career history or my life, and as many of us are experiencing the same things in different ways. I started off the pandemic working overseas, and was very lucky to make it back to Canada at all before flights were cut off and full lockdown almost everywhere in the world began. The SICIPO as an organization is a capacity building organization, and because we're small, but we do have a full footprint, large footprint, we're able to really respond quickly. And over the past 15 some odd years, we've relied very heavily on telehealth modalities and digital frameworks to deliver educational programming, continuing professional development, rapid response initiatives, but never quite to this extent. But because we had frameworks already in place, and because we're small, so we don't necessarily need to go through a very long bureaucratic process, we're able to very quickly utilize our existing resources, both within SICIPO and also within partner organizations, local implementing partners, to magnify their impact on the ground, and also be able to respond here in Canada. Now, I'm really amazed with what all of the organizations with OCIC have been doing, and the things that I've seen happen over the past 8 months. I think that for us as an organization, we've historically always looked to take an anti-oppression approach, an anti-racism approach, an approach that embeds gender equity, environmental equity, all these different pieces, while at the same time encouraging that on a collaborative basis with other partners in the nonprofit and the academic and the healthcare sector, plural sectors. Since the pandemic began, it's been amazing to see the shift in adopting these types of social justice principles. And very early on in the pandemic, we were able to work towards aligning ourselves, not just with the Feminist International Assistance Policy and working towards the SDGs, which we've been doing all along, but also towards the just recovery principles, which seem to be at the, something that completely made sense from the get-go. And in terms of separating it as respond, recovery, and rebuild, we were able to create a structure that allowed us to better inform what we were doing so that we could look towards addressing the social determinants of health, creating as I think it was Tina that mentioned that social safety net that was absent in the past, although we consider ourselves a country that's based on the development of that historical social safety net. And now we're actually looking at silver lining this by using the just recovery principles at the 3 different stages, respond, recover, and rebuild, to strengthen that social safety net in a way that's more, not just robust, but less performative and more functional. And I think that this is really key. Another aspect which was really relevant for SISPO and all of our partners, and I haven't heard it brought up as of yet in this discussion, but I'm sure it will come up more and more as we continue on today and tomorrow, is the idea that as Canadian organizations, all the work that we do is about informing or capacity building to our international partners. So unidirectional knowledge transfer, when it's not actually that. And I think that functionally we understand that we're in an environment where now we realize the value that our local implementing partners and teams overseas as a whole are able to contribute to capacity building here in Canada as well. So where does that bring us? It brings us to the point where we can realize the value of multi-directional knowledge transfer and using crisis in the form of the pandemic as a catalyst for disruptive change towards a more socially supportive country and society that has key elements in it so that there's quality of life, better quality of life for everyone, whether it's LGBTQ+, whether it's BIPOC, whether it's women at risk of gender-based violence, whether it's those that need support with harm reduction, whether it's youth. All of these different elements of society together contributing to inform a stronger society here in Canada in tandem with our partners overseas. So I'll give you one quick example before we move on. And that
if you can wrap it up, please, because we're running out of time. Yes. But you can go ahead.
No, my one quick example, and I think you'll find this really interesting, because it's been an incredible experience. As difficult as the pandemic has been, and as difficult as it's been to see the devastation and the inequities the pandemic has exposed, SISPO was able to work on a triangular cooperation project from the point of the pandemic beginning in Palestine, using the Israeli-Palestinian cooperation COVID task force under the Canadian umbrella. So it's triangular cooperation. And the idea behind it was to create community health workers who would then be able to service women's health needs. So we go back to maternal, newborn, child health, connect it all together at the community level, and not just develop something in the resource poor areas of Palestine, but also here in Canada, in Toronto. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Shauna. I think a very interesting point that you brought up was this idea of sharing knowledge and not necessarily coming from developing countries, coming from Canada, sorry, to developing countries, but also the other way around. And I think this is very interesting, but also the knowledge sharing between developing countries in general. So again, because we work in 21 countries, what we really try to foster and promote is, for instance, if we're working in the beekeeping sector in Philippines, there's a lot of knowledge that can be shared to Tanzania, to Bolivia, to other parts of the world. And the idea of the global knowledge sharing platforms and how we can all learn from everywhere, probably, now that technology has been really one of the major aspects of our lives. I think it has brought us closer to really having the more globalization and the more globalized knowledge sharing platforms that are very efficient, but also very effective in capacity building, but also in increasing our knowledge in general and our abilities, of course. And now we can turn to another interesting question that you also brought up, Shauna, which is about looking to the future. So what now? What support is still needed? What do we need to focus on? Of course, again, this is a question that's very open-ended and we can talk about it for days and days. But if our panelists could summarize their points in 3 minutes. So let's start with Tina. What do you think? How does the future look like? What is still needed? What support do you think is still needed on the ground?
Yeah, so can you hear me? I don't know if I took off my mic. Perfect. I think I'll just kind of roll up and I'll be succinct, but around pivoting and adapting, I just wanted to build on some of the communication points I highlighted and going from building on what you've said, Sarah, live events to virtual events and how we've adapted from there. And then I'll just get into kind of moving forward, if that's okay. So we adapted. We're all here. We're on Zoom, so we've all adapted. And just to give you a snapshot of some of the indicators or analysis that we found virtual versus live, we found a lot of similarities, but a lot of differences as well. So there was a significant higher registration rate. It's kind of intuitive based on the global reach that you just spoke about, Sarah, to live events. But I'm not just talking like doubling, I'm talking like tripling and quadrupling our reach. And so when Marianick was talking about local to global or, Canadians wherever they are, Canadians are everywhere. So I think, we talked about some of the disadvantages of COVID and having to adapt or shift, but there are a lot of benefits. And so based on the reach, it's great. We've seen a significant growth in our participation. Also from the country perspective. So, I think we've had up to 31 countries participate on any of our, what we've called town halls. Another area is that our events, our live events, were kind of one-offs, but having to kind of strategically step back and look at what engagement, what public engagement we'll look for in the future, what outreach might look like. We really had to create a series. So it's just taking the time to be strategic up front, and that has helped us quite a bit. We noticed that in the surveys that we've given to our participants, the satisfaction level has been the same as live events, which I found very interesting. And the chat feature, I know it's not the same as being there, but it does lend some engagement. So that was an opportunity as well. And we know that, building community takes time. So I just want to close with a best practice. When we have 3 questions, we can answer them live. If we have 30 or 40 questions, we can't. But one of the best practices that CUSO has adopted is responding, taking the time to respond to a very informed community over time. So, it might take 3 weeks, but part of our practice after a virtual event is to respond to every single person. And that has fostered an appreciation and a deeper commitment and connection. And so I'll stop. I'm not sure if you're going to go to round 3, so I'm not sure where to go, but I think I'll stop there and then highlight kind of maybe what still needs to happen, if that's okay, Sarah, unless you want me to continue.
I think let's keep the discussion going, and we'll get back to this point because I think it's one of the very important points that needs a lot of attention and a lot of detail. So if you can discuss it with your group during the breakouts, that would be amazing. Sure. Otherwise, we can summarize it at the end as well. Laura, can you also give us your perspective about what now? what happens now, what's happening in the short, medium, and long term, what still needs to be done.
Well, there's a lot to still be done. There was a lot to be done before COVID-19, so yeah, it's not new. But I think one thing to sort of build on is our partners are very good at building relationships with different levels of society, with government authorities, traditional authorities. And we've been able to adapt and pivot programs because they had these relationships, because they had built this trust over a long period of time. So I think it's important to sort of continue building on that. Something that I think will be key sort of to this what now and how do we support all sort of sectors in our perspective in Central America and Mexico is that we need to continue to provide open channels of communication, but at the same time, we need to back that up with sustained and predictable financing. The region has, for a long time, not had financing. Our partners are telling us they're losing financing from international donors. So we need to sort of think of, okay, what are future-wise? How are we going to support the sort of recovery in a real way, not just, through ideas that don't have any sort of operational way to actually be implemented. And through support that is flexible. Something that really helped us is that we had some flexibility had funding that was, for humanitarian needs, but also for long-term sort of impact. So you need to have sort of that mixed support that it's flexible in response to the needs that are sort of short-term related to COVID-19 and the long-term needs related to the impact of COVID-19 and the fragility that existed before. Yeah, that's my short answer.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for keeping it within the 3 minutes. So I think now we can engage just before we break through. Juan Jose, if you can give us kind of the youth perspective of all this and youth in Colombia, but also here in Canada, what do you think? What does the Build Back Better strategy would potentially look like in developing countries, but also all over the world? So maybe you can give us some insights here about how, for instance, the value of innovation and technology has really been proven throughout this, and how activities are going to keep on going in that regard.
Like here, it's like what we're doing. Well, here, the artistic programs, we're doing like I don't know if you know about Art Attack. What was that? It was a program who was recorded, and they were doing like handmade things. I don't know. It's like manualidades. Eugenia, how do you say manualidades?
Arts and crafts.
Yeah. And yeah, we were doing that. Our artistic programs are being recorded, and it also gives us a new opportunity to get an approach and also an engagement through the virtuality and through all these technology things. Now we are connected, not just giving them the knowledge about what the program needs, but now the teachers are also having a better communication with the participants, and also with the participants, it is also involved the family. So it was as Tina was saying, there are not just things that could be different in virtuality. It is also some benefits, and that's the way that we are doing here. And I think that it's really interesting, or it's really good to when we think about the use our digital resources, all technology to adapt our processes or our projects. It's a new form to work, and it is a new form to do a better engagement, not just the user or the participant, but also we are also working with families. So I think that it is even more impacting. That's why I think of that. Yeah, that's why I believe.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting, I guess. Sean, I have about 2 to 3 minutes to give us your inputs about that as well. Maybe you could discuss or mention really what is the role of capacity building here, and again, what was your experience with the online events versus live events, if you have any, and again, going back to what does the future look like and the building back stronger, as well as any future collaborations, support that is still needed. And then we're going to break through into our groups.
Another huge question.
It all falls on you.
Okay, I'm going to make it succinct. So I'll start with the digital frameworks, because I think that this is really the innovation, the disruptive innovation that's going to give us the capacity to move forward effectively. And so the way that SISIPO has been tapping into this is looking at it from an individual, organizational, and systemic point of view. So number one, at the individual level, reducing barriers to participating online, because we take it for granted that both here in Canada and also overseas, everybody will have access to reliable internet, and yet we see that that is continuously not the case. And it's a big dividing line. You know, where we have on our panel Juan Jose, who in today's panel and in our pre-session didn't have access to reliable internet, and at the same time there's really no reason for it. We're at the stage as a global community where we can make it happen, and so what we've been doing in SISIPO is exploring ways of partnering with, say, the European Space Agency, which we've been working with for about 10 years on a plan to create hubs that will better improve access to reliable internet for those in remote areas who want to participate, who should be enabled and empowered by creating safe spaces to access the global community at large, and this makes a huge difference. I'm really amazed and impressed with what the provincial government and federal government have done with regards to their commitment to strengthen digital infrastructure for remote communities in Ontario and in Canada as a whole. We've got to really, I think, as civil society organizations, continue to push them to make that happen quicker, and at the same time support that through whatever resources we have at the local level. So if we know that we can reach out to communities and set things up in the interim so that we lay the groundwork, so that when the provincial and federal governments step in, the groundwork is already there, that it's very quick step up towards activating and taking away this very big dividing line between have and have nots, which doesn't need to be there at this stage. So secondly, in terms of organizational programming, we've been able to develop a lot of content that's been responsive to needs related to the pandemic, and mostly that's because we've been listening really carefully, doing monitoring and evaluation on an ongoing basis, using tools that were shared with us through organizations like Spur Change in capacity building sessions, and other organizations that have really taught us quick monitoring skills, so that we can properly inform the content of our digital programming. And so one of the things that we were able to do was further develop our Telehealth Grand Rounds program, which we've been offering for about 15 years in different disciplines. I'll give you a perfect example. One of our programs is in dermatology. And so we would have I guess it was twice a month, bi-monthly basis, dermatology sessions that were specific to needs identified within the group of participants. We had over 3,000 participants in every single session, both actively engaging online in the Zoom meetings, so they're grand rounds, which we use in medicine. I'm a physician, so this is something that that's useful for me and my colleagues, but also we didn't limit it to physicians, so it was healthcare workers. And then out of that, we were able to use SurveyMonkey and other tools to figure out that what was also needed was a rapid response communication tool so that we could share best practices, that we could do referrals. And so we set up something called Telederm, and we also embedded WhatsApp into that, and it's a group of practice. And then we were able to replicate that in my area, which is cardiology. And so it was global, it became global. And so global in dermatology, global in cardiology, all specific to the effects of the pandemic. And that's at the professional level, but we also do it at the local level. So it's not just about, we don't want barriers to accessing information or knowledge. We're very, very big proponent, and SISPO itself is very supportive of open access to knowledge. And we look at things like risk mitigation, while at the same time really being focused on improving accessibility of knowledge. So we're not creating several tiers of society based on access to that knowledge. And so,
Shauna, if you can wrap up, please, because we need to break out.
Yeah, so I could give you a million other really fantastic examples, but I welcome anyone to ask me about them later. Essentially, I really believe, going back to what I said at the beginning, is that crisis catalyst for change, that the way forward is using those just recovery principles and embedding them into useful digital infrastructure, but at the same time, not forgetting the individual, not forgetting that people need to have access, and we don't want to divide more, we want to unify, we want to collaborate. And we can build that around the just recovery principles using all the new digital infrastructures that come, but we got to lay the foundation to access.
All right, thank you very much, Shauna. Very interesting points. The idea of having access to digital means and technology in general is indeed very important. And again, it is also linked to the gender equality issue, because usually women are even less accessible to have less access to these kinds of means, technology and digital in general. So Eugene, can you please give us the instructions for the breakout?
Perfect. Thank you all. Super interesting. And this is where it gets fun. So I really encourage you to stay on. We're going to be put into breakout rooms, and you're going to get access to one of the speakers in your breakout room. So this is really a chance for you to ask more questions, dig deep, or also if you have things to share, and it sounds like a lot of you do, this is the time for you to do so. So feel free to put on your camera, unmute yourself, and really have a dialogue around the pieces that have been brought forward today. So we're gonna see you back in 15 minutes. We're gonna give you prompts so you know when to wrap up. And please don't get disconnected. We're gonna come back onto the main space after the breakout space, and we'll have a chance for Q&A, and Sarah will of course close us off. So see you in a little bit, and hope if you do have issues with the breakout space, feel free to chat with me or Eliza, who can support you. See you in a bit.
Summary of what we discussed within my group, and then I'll ask the rest of the panelists to also give us in 2 minutes just a summary of what was discussed and the main points being discussed. So I think from my group, we started off talking about what are the lessons learned from this current situation. So what are the positive things? What is going to stay with us in the coming few years, and what are the things that we still need to change? And I think one of the main things that was discussed is the importance of technology and the importance of everything being digital, everything being virtual. And I gave the example of CASO, because we are a volunteer sending organization, and we usually deploy Canadian experts to the field in order to deliver capacity building activities. We're no longer able to do that. So we had to shift and adapt and start implementing virtual assignments and having everything by Skype and working with our local partners through that. But then the question that was raised here was, how do we develop and strengthen and consolidate partnerships without being physically there? And that's also a very interesting question, because different organizations have very different means and ways of dealing with the situation. And And it's also about being accountable to our donors, being accountable to Global Affairs Canada, who really want to know how long we've been working with this partner, how strong they are, what is their capacity in implementing the project, and stuff like that. So I think it was a very, very interesting discussion around really how to develop and create and consolidate partnerships while not necessarily being there physically. So yeah, I can hear other perspectives from other groups and what they've discussed. Let's start with Tina. Is Tina here? Okay, then we can start with Laura then. I don't know where Tina went.
Hopefully she comes back soon.
Yeah.
So in our group, we discussed a little bit about innovation and also some challenges that our partners have in sort of, and I think Lisa put it in the chat, safely communicating for human rights defenders or people working in human rights space is important, that communication is available, but also safe communication to sort of share ideas. And we discussed it a little bit. Then, we shifted a little bit the conversation into, how do we engage with our partners, similar to, I think, the conversation that you were having, and in particular, how do we do monitoring and evaluation in sort of this new context? And so, we had an exchange of ideas and ways that we're doing it. A lot of it, again, has, shifted to virtual spaces and sort of reanalyzing the frameworks that we were using before to still meet our requirements that, for those that are funded through Global Affairs, but do it from a distance. And so yeah, it was a good chat. I don't know if we also touched a little bit about how to stay sane and how to connect to our communities when we're so far away. So it's up to each partner and organization, and I think individual, how we communicate with our communities away when we're not able to visit them and see them and sort of keep our energy up. Yeah,
definitely. Shana, how was your discussion with the group? You're muted.
It's always good just, mouthing what I'm saying, rather than actually saying it. No, we had a fantastic group composition, and we really got into first some points about being CSOs. How do we overcome some of the challenges related to internet access? And I brought up the European Space Agency project that SISPO has been working on, and how we're looking right now for the partnership of other CSOs, because we've got 28 country partners, and we need CSOs, Canadian CSOs, and local implementing partners to jump in so we can move that piece forward. Because we can do it best together, and that's a substantial program. Not funded by Global Affairs Canada, but by the European Space Agency and the Canadian Space Agency, that directly addresses these gaps in access through satellite technology and telemedicine itself. So you're not relying on local infrastructure, and can be very quickly implemented, which led us into a further discussion about techniques to encourage adoption through and the differences in other modalities. So we had some comments that were really relevant about the use of tools like radio and SMS-based technology, which are extremely simple, easy to adopt, very contextually appropriate, and we don't necessarily need to overreach when we can use something like radio technology or SMS to get us through initial challenges or barriers to communication, effective communication. And from that point, we touched on the implementation science piece, which really we got cut off because it was going to get into a really interesting discussion about social behavioral frameworks and differences in implementation, say, for example, between South Korea or the United States or the UK, which could answer a lot of questions for many of us working within CSO, is how to appropriately apply in a sensitive and responsive way to implementation challenges as CSOs. You're on
Oh
mute.
no, Sarah, yes.
Now it's my turn to do that. Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And I think, again, the different groups had some common points to discuss, and that's coming to the surface now. So finally, Juan Jose can give us also an overview about what was discussed in your group, what were the main highlights.
Of course, well, thank you very much for the people who is into my room. It was really nice to see today, and well, for everyone here, they will. Well, we were talking about the podcast that we were talking of what we do and what when we realized that violence against women start. So I shared with the people who is with me the link of the of the of the of the products we were creating. So we were I'm gonna send you to you all if you want, if you are I send you to Eugenia alone. But I'm gonna send again. There we're gonna find like a podcast and you can listen and some real stories about some social I'm sorry. Some I don't know. I don't.
Let me know if I can
Let
help
me
you.
let me start again because I lost. We were talking about the products we're doing to what we're doing in order to face the violence against women. So in those short videos, you are gonna be able to hear some real experiences about some social pressures that women are facing all days since the childhood uh, until until more of time of the life. And in, in there are some speeches to empower like the things that all of the participants that we were doing this would like to hear from someone. So it was like a process who was like, I faced this, but now I can empower you to tell you that it is not really necessary. So you can live without the stereotype of beauty. You can be more focused on your dreams or what you want to do in life or in your reflections. Or it is important to listen your voice and and there you can find that. It was that we were discussing, and in there also there a magazine who we were sharing to people to know what was the line to call in order if they face violence against women. So it was that. I'm sorry for the for the for the time that I was lost, but now it was the idea I wanted to say.
Very, very interesting. I guess there was the last group who worked with Tina. If there's anyone who would like to mention any of the points discussed for their group, any volunteers to do that? I know I'm putting people on the spot. I shouldn't do that, but just to make sure that all the groups are mentioned. Okay. Well, I hope Tina's group had a very meaningful discussion. But I guess now we have 7 more minutes in the session and this panel, and we can get into concluding remarks. The past hour have been very, very interesting to me personally. I think a lot of knowledge and a lot of different perspectives were really brought out, and people from different backgrounds, different experiences were able to give their perspectives. So I was very happy to moderate this. Some of the key points that we discussed were the importance of the digital infrastructure and access to technology. We also discussed the inclusion of women, indigenous populations, marginalized groups, and really thinking not just about the sectors, but also about the different communities and how the crisis has impacted different communities. And there's no doubt that with strong international cooperation, we can really achieve this equitable recovery or the build back stronger that we have been discussing. And I think I can open the floor for any questions from the audience. You can either just type your questions in the chat, and I'll read them out if there are specific questions to specific panelists. Nothing yet. Okay, until we get any of the questions from the audience, maybe I can do one last round with the panelists to give us their concluding remarks in 1 or 2 minutes. Please stick to the 1 or 2 minutes because
Sarah,
the session is ending.
Sorry, we actually need to close. This is the last 5 minutes of this session, and it sounds like people are satisfied with what they've heard today. And we also have a networking session coming up, so we'll have a little bit more time. And if you're keen, stick around. So if you could just close, final words from you, Sarah, that would be lovely, and I'll close us off.
Of course. Thank you, Jaya. So I guess just to conclude all of this, I think that responding to the current pandemic should get us closer to the vision of the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development Goals across key dimensions, whether it's social, economic, or environmental. And again, there's no doubt that the just recovery post-COVID will be an extensive activity, requiring a lot of effort and time, but there are some positive sides that we could keep on. Again, as mentioned, the digitalization of our lives and of most operations and activities has been very interesting, and I hope this is something that would stay with us for a few more years to come. But again, building back and the recovery will only take place through strong collaboration, strong international cooperation as well, which is really what a lot of organizations are currently doing. So I hope everyone enjoyed the session and learned as much as I did. I hope everyone found it interesting. And as Jaya just mentioned, I guess we have the networking session that we can discuss a little bit more if there's anything you would like. So thank you everyone for today. And thank you OCIC for organizing the symposium and organizing this session and putting us all in the same room, virtual room, but it's still a room.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. Really, from all of us and on behalf of OCIC, really appreciate your energy and all of your insights to all of the panelists as well. This is lovely. This is the one time in the year where we get to really hear what everybody's up to. And on that spirit, we have one more day of programming tomorrow. Please, keep coming back. We have wonderful conversations around systemic change and the need to switch our mindsets, to switch how we do programs, and how can we start thinking about that together. So we have thought leaders from across Canada joining us tomorrow, and across sectors as well. So it's bound to be a really interesting one in the morning, and in the afternoon we have folks from different sectors as well, and from our membership talking about community engagement and ethics and that, and also rethinking how we do some of that community engagement piece. So please join us. And before I pass it on to Emily, I just love a round of applause if you want to take off your mic, put on your mic, sorry, for panelists. Amazing. I love the spirit fingers or the jazz fingers. Yes, thank you. Thank you, panelists. Emily, would you like to tell us a little bit about the networking session coming up? You're all invited to stay if you are keen.
Absolutely. And for those of you who can still stay for the next half an hour, I hope you won't be getting up to too many shenanigans like last year's icebreaker that I hosted with shearing sheep and spinning wool. Not today, I'm sorry, but we're gonna try to make some connections and continue to get to know each other and have